I'm Kurt Johnson, the co-founder with Brother Wayne Teasdale and others of the Interspiritual Dialogue and the Interspiritual Multiplex website, and the co-author of the book with David Ord, The Coming Interspiritual Age, which is in a sense a follow-up book to Brother Wayne Teasdale's book, The Mystic Heart, Discovering a Universal Spirituality in the World's Religions. And in that book, The Mystic Heart, Brother Wayne had actually named interspirituality and the coming interspiritual age as what would happen when we entered the epoch of globalization and multiculturalism, and that challenged the identity of the world's religions and spiritual understandings of reality to come to some type of universal or global understanding. And so we really take up 10 years later from the status of that evolutionary process. Now, the book is really based on the understanding that we're moving into what I think everyone acknowledges as an epoch of globalization and multiculturalism. That process is going to happen irrespective of what informs it. And it's a big question for our species whether that's going to be a kind process or whether it's going to be a difficult process. So the globalization process and the multicultural process have profound implications on a world that has birthed many cultures, many worldviews, many religious traditions, and also even diversity across its sociological systems and its ways that it even does its science and medicine. So what's going on globally then is really asking what is going to inform the globalization and multicultural process. Is it only going to be, let's say, the view of science and the grand machine, which has nothing to do with understanding who we are subjectively and the stories of humankind for millennia? Or is it also going to be informed by what we call the great wisdom traditions, which would be what we can glean together and have gleaned together from what all the spiritual, philosophical, and ethical traditions have also taught us? So the tendency of our species to go through two different lenses, the rational lens on the one hand, which is tended toward the story of the grand machine, and then the religious lens, the subjective or even the magic mythic lens, which has tended to go toward stories about reality that are more subjective, that are more mythological. These two paths, almost like right hand and left hand, are going to have to come into a dynamic and healthy dialogue for our future as a species to actually be a successful one. We're going to have to reach a threshold which is universal and global and holistic. Now, one of the things that this book does is it takes you through, in a very easy way to understand, what's called developmental history. And what that does, it shows you the stages that our species has gone through to build our culture on a worldwide level, and also the challenges that we meet as we stand at the threshold that we stand at right now. So just at the time that we're globalizing and coming into this multicultural awareness, we're also facing all of these issues of climate change, resource competition, weapons of mass destruction, political agendas and economic agendas that are of a competitive nature and mostly not thinking in the sense of what is the well-being of the whole. So this question of how we will step up to a sense of the well-being of the whole is something that Brother Wayne said would be the task of the interspiritual age. He basically said, if an interspirituality or a universal understanding of our religious heritages has to be inevitable, it will be the work of that interspiritual age to define holistically how all of these different worldviews can move together. So just to give you a couple examples of stages that we've gone through, everybody knows that one of the big transitions historically from the Renaissance up to the time of the Declaration of Independence was our understanding of the value of the individual. And really, as of 1776, with what happened in America, after 70 centuries of church-state totalitarianism, suddenly we started to see the experiments worldwide with different ways of doing things based on the value of the individual. We see that erupting in the Arab Spring today. We see it erupting in Occupy. We see it erupting in what's even called the Catholic Spring. And what's happening now is that we're moving in this time of globalization then to asking the questions then about the collective. In other words, we're moving from a consciousness of the value of I to the question about the consciousness and the value of we. And this is a huge threshold, which is actually what the globalization and multicultural threshold is challenging us with. Now, to wind this toward a quick conclusion then, what you can see just by reading the newspapers, watching CNN or whatever, is that there are profound positive energies and profound negative energies vying at a global level about what will inform this process. Is it going to be informed by competition and confrontation, or is it going to be informed by senses of unity, heart, love, kindness, ethics, and values? And I think if we're honest, all of us know that we're at a precarious tipping point where this could go either way. Now, where this book really winds up then is asking the question about what is the responsibility of the religions and the spiritual traditions, the subjective understandings that humankind has developed over the millennia, to this question of whether humanity will actually survive or not. And there's a branch of science that's called the cognitive science of religion. And basically what it observes is that, unfortunately, historically, religion has tended to hijack the values and ethics of spirituality. In other words, whereas spirituality in its nature, which is really about deed over creed, it's about kindness, about heart, what's really been at the base of all the religions, ends up getting hijacked historically toward things that become creed over deed, or serving an elite, or serving a leader, or a creed, or a dogma. And so suddenly what has been the deepest inner experience ends up sociologically being a point of conflict and confrontation. So actually what the cognitive science of religion asks is, when will that hijacking stop? In other words, it defines a new threshold for our species, which really challenges the spiritual traditions to ask themselves, what are we going to be? Are we going to be part of the problem, or are we going to be part of the solution? Now, if actually the religions and spiritual traditions are going to be part of the solution, what it basically means is that they are going to have to emphasize their shared moral, ethical, heart-based, kindness-based, fair play-based. Those values are going to have to be put in the driver's seat, as opposed to ultimate claims about reality, creeds, dogmas, end-time scenarios, and everything that historically has always caused the religions to not only disagree, but in many cases to end up having wars and everything else that we saw as recently as 9/11. So this is actually what the challenge is about. And the question is, if the interspiritual age actually comes, which seems inevitable, are we going to work these things out at a global level, or are we going to have some really serious difficulties? So that's the challenge that the book puts forward, and it pretty much lays out what the landscape looks like today, both positively and negatively, about that, how that might play out. So thanks for taking some time to understand what's in this book, and if you take the time to read it, I hope that it's informative and inspiring.